What is up, guys? This is Caleb with Krakenhits, and today I'm going to be giving you my take on Dragapult Dusknoir in the Journey Together format. This is a deck I feel like does pretty well into Journey Together, just because the Noctowl engine is becoming super popular in that format, because Dragapult can just pick up Hoothoots very easily with the help of Dusclops, and taking those out of play just hurts your opponent's consistency so much that Ionos stick them with bad hands late game, and you can just Phantom Dive, knock out some Hoothoots, win the game. Play an Iono, win the game. So first, in this list, of course, we got the 4/4/3 Dragapult EX. Of course, the Dracloak with Recon Directive is one of the best consistency Pokemon in the game. Looking at the top two cards of your deck, putting one in your hand, one on the bottom. You just get to see so many cards with it that playing anything less than 4 just feels terrible. Like chaining Recon Directive into like finding another Dracloak, into more Recon Directives is a super powerful tool that just like sets up your whole board super quickly. And then Dragapult. Some lists haven't only been playing 2. I've opted for the 3 here just because it's so important to find it. Unlike last format, we don't have Lance. Instead, we're playing cards like Jock, and Jock is a lot less powerful than Lance. It only gets you 2 Pokemon instead of 3, so your ball search cards have a lot more pressure on them to find Pokemon like Dracloak and Dragapult. So if you just naturally draw Dragapult with either Recon Directive or like Pheasantipity, puts less pressure on those, and you can use those cards instead to find stuff like Dusknoir or your own Pheasantipity. I've decided to go with 3 Dragapults, but it could be worth experimenting with 2 a little bit, like if you're drawing it often enough. And then I also have the 3-2-1 Dusknoir in here. There's like a good mix of counts you can play here. I've seen 2-1-2, 3-1-2, even 3-1-1 in this deck, in this format. I've stuck with the thicker 3-2-1 line, mainly because I'm also decided to include Technical Machine Devolution in this list. So with the higher Dusclops count, you can use Dusclops on opposing Milotics, which you can't damage with Dragapult, and then you can Devolution them, and since Phoebus only has 30 HP, it's a really effective way to remove Milotic from play and get around a wall that this deck normally wouldn't be able to get around without popping like 2 Dusknoirs and like using Itchy Pollen or Petty Grudge with Dreepy. And also Dusclops, if you use Dusclops and don't take a knockout on a Hoothoot or something like that, it also can activate your counter catchers, whereas if you like just use Dusknoir on a Hoothoot or something, you and your opponent would both take a prize, so it wouldn't necessarily activate counter catcher. So it feels like Dusclops is like pretty powerful in this format, even like sometimes more so than Dusknoir. So that's why I've opted for the 3-2-1 line. Okay, and then our last attacking Pokemon, we got Budew. Itchy Pollen is just one of the best things you can do on the first turn of the game. Slows your opponent down a lot, and if we get extra turns with this deck, we can abuse those really well by setting up more Dracloaks, getting more Recon Directives in. We're usually not just draw passing after we use Itchy Pollen on our next turn. If we can make our opponents draw pass and we get our board more established, we are very happy. And then we've got the 2 other consistency Pokemon I've opted to include, Pheasantipity and Tatsugiri. Pheasantipity is very standard in almost every deck in this format. You really can't think of a deck you wouldn't want to play it in right now. Just drawing 3 cards after your opponent takes a knockout is way too powerful to not include. Bails you out of dead hands, draws you into your big combos with Dusknoir and Dracloaks and Dragapult. Then Tatsugiri I've decided to include just because I've noticed I've had a lot of hands where I have Ball Search but no supporter cards. So it can come up where you can retreat into Tatsugiri, get an Arven or an Iono, and like get a Buddy Poffin off of that, and just continue to get more setup than you would if you did not play it. There's no more Luminion or Rotom in this format, so our options are pretty limited on Pokemon that can find your supporter cards or just draw you more cards, so I think Tatsugiri seems like a pretty solid inclusion for now. Maybe it comes out later in favor of more supporter cards, but I feel like it's a very nice thing to have. And if you can just have it on your board with the rescue board. Whenever your opponent takes a knockout, you always get that free look at the top 6, grab a supporter card. So I've been liking it so far in my testing. For supporter cards, we're on 4 Arven, 3 Iono, 3 Jock, and 2 Boss. Arven is basically the supporter card we want to play on the first turn of almost every game, and it's almost always going to be getting a Buddy Poffin, or at least on the first turn we can play supporters, I should say. And it will almost always be getting Buddy Poffin, and then like rescue board or something to get into your Budew or Tatsugiri. That's what I have found. Buddy Poffin obviously is like just the best way to find our Pokemon. You want to be maximizing our outs to find that on turn 1, so 4 Arven. 3 Iono. Iono is like outside of obviously taking knockouts, Iono is a very good win condition to have in this deck. We can force our opponent to take extra prize cards with Dusknoir. They're going to be taking prize cards earlier than us just because we're probably not attacking till turn 3 with Dragapult. Yeah, this deck abuses Iono very well. Just putting our opponent on low hands, and then Dragapult can attack and not take knockouts to not activate Fez, or it can just knock out Fez and then deny our opponent drawing extra cards. So Iono is very, very good in this deck. We're not playing the 4th just because I felt like I needed to play some tech cards like Technical Machine Devolution and Tetsugiri, but if you cut those, 4th Iono is probably one of the first cards that's coming into the deck. Then 3 Jock. Jock is our way to find our Dracloaks. Ultra Ball is not a very efficient way to find Dracloaks. We want to be playing Jock for our Dracloaks. Yeah, so our turn 2, ideally after we play our Arven for our Poffin for 2 Dreepies, we play our Jock for 2 Dracloaks. We get our 2 Dracloaks up, we got our Recon Directives going, and then from there it's hopefully smooth sailing, and we probably won't need to play more than 1 Jock, but we want to have as many in our deck as we can fit, just because finding it on turn 2 is going to be so important. And then we got 2 Boss. Boss, one of the best ways to just win a game, close out a game, either bossing like a Fezandipity or a small Pokemon with another small Pokemon on the bench, take extra prize cards. We want to be able to play these late game once we've caught back up with our opponent and our counter catchers are offline. So yeah, I've got 2 of them in here for now. Moving on to Ball Search, we're on 4 Poffin, 3 Ultra Ball, 2 Nest Ball. 4 Poffin, like I said earlier, best way to get our Dreepies and Duskulls out. 3 Ultra Ball. Ultra Ball has lost quite a bit of value in this deck with the rotation of Luminion, but I've still got 3 in here for now just because we want to be able to find our Dracloaks, and we're not always going to be able to play Jock for our Dracloak, so having more outs to find our Dracloaks off of Iono is super important. So 3 Ultra Ball is I don't ever think we're going back up to 4 Ultra Balls, but maybe it comes down a little bit. And then 2 Nest Ball. Nest Ball is kind of half a Poffin. I think Fezandipity is the only Pokemon in this deck that Nest Ball finds that Poffin doesn't. But it just so happens Fezandipity is also one of the best cards in the game. So we want to be playing Nest Ball to find our Fezandipity. And we want to have just more outs to find our little guys on turn 1. So 2 Nest Balls, pretty good. Then our other items, we got 2 Candies, 2 Stretchers, and 2 Counter Catchers as our other 2 of items. Candy gets our Dusknoir combo going. Also can allow us to be a little more aggressive with the Dragapult. If our Dracloaks are getting torrential pumped by Wellspring Mask, Ogerpon, and we need to go fast, we can go Candy Dragapult, so we have something that can't be knocked out by Wellspring Mask. Also just Candy Dusknoir combos allows you to go quite a bit faster. So I like 2 Candies for now. 2 Stretchers. We're playing Stretchers and not Super Rod just because we don't have Crispin in this list. So Stretchers feels generally better. We can get our Dusknoir back. We can get our energies back to our hand directly without needing to shuffle them into our deck. So Stretcher feels like the better recovery card in here. And we can it allows you to get away with only playing 1 Dusknoir a lot easier. Then the 2 Counter Catchers these are very powerful when paired with Iono. You can Counter Catcher, Fezandipity, Iono your opponent to a low hand size, knock out the Fezandipity, like I've been talking about. Basically just targeting our opponent's support Pokemon is usually what we want to be doing with this deck, and Counter Catcher allows us to do that pretty well. Then Earthen Vessel is just a way to get energy off of Arven. It's really tough when you miss energy drops with this deck, so we want to minimize that, and having an out off of Arven to get your energies is pretty good. And then Switch. This is a little bit of a weird one, but Switch allows you to use Tatsugiri better. If you have to use your rescue board earlier, Switch makes Tatsugiri not a completely dead card because you don't need to commit energy to it. I've been thinking this spot might also be better as either a second rescue board or a Latias EX, depending on if you decide to play an Ursaluna EX in here. But for now, I just have it a Switch because it just gives you more outs to get into Budu and Tatsugiri earlier, and it also is another card off of Arven. Like if your Arven needs to find Sparkling Crystal, you can also get Switch instead of like having to get Rescue Board for like 2 tools. So yeah, that's probably one of the weaker cards in the deck right now, but I feel like I need to have either a Switch or another way to move Tatsugiri. Alright, then for the tool cards, we got the Rescue Board, the Defiance Band, the A-Spec Sparkling Crystal, and Technical Machine Devolution, like I talked about earlier. The Rescue Board is very important to get into your Budew early on off of Arven. So if you Arven, you can get your Rescue Board and your Puff, and you can Puff Budew, get your Rescue Board out. It also is very good on Tatsugiri, so just very strong card in this deck. Defiance Band is kind of one I'm up in the air on. Without Radiant Alakazam in this format, Defiance Band I feel like is more valuable in this deck because you can't so as easily move 1 damage counter from your opponent's other Pokemon to something like a Fezandipiti EX or a Ogerpon or something that you're going to want to knock out, but also you still have like Dusclops, and you also can just place damage on it before with Phantom Dive. So I'm not quite sold on this card in this deck, but for now I feel like it's pretty good. It allows you to knock out, like I said, Fezandipiti, Ogerpon, even like Terapagos without having to put damage on it preemptively. So yeah. And then Sparkling Crystal as our A-Spec. As you notice, this list isn't playing any Crispin, and the main reason we can get away with that is because of Sparkling Crystal. Sparkling Crystal just makes it so that Sparkling Crystal makes it so that when you're hitting your energy drops, you can just put down Sparkling Crystal, and you only need like 1 energy drop on your board before you can attack. Whereas if we're not playing Sparkling Crystal or Crispin, we would need to like probably have 3 energy on our board before we'd feel comfortable attacking, just because if our Dragapult EX dies, we would want another Dragapult ready to go. But with Sparkling Crystal, let's say you attach 1 energy on your second turn to a Dracloak, and that energy stays on your board, then you can then put Sparkling Crystal in that Dracloak that turns into a Dragapult, put 1 energy on your bench, and you basically have set up back-to-back Dragapults. And usually with this deck, we're trying to win in 2 attacks or less. So by doing that, by having that Sparkling Crystal, it just makes our 2 back-to-back attacks pretty easy to get. And if you get the 2 back-to-back attacks, I feel like you're winning most games. And then we got Technical Machine Devolution. Like I said earlier, this is mostly a tech for the Walls matchup. If you put it on a Pokemon that's not Dragapult, and attach an energy, you can Devo, turn Milotic into Phoebus, and Phoebus dies to Curse Blast from Dusclops. So you can wipe multiple Milotics off the board pretty easily with Devo. And it also can come up in other spots against like Gardevoir and even in the mirror, either to just slow them down by devolving their Dracloaks out of play, or to even take knockouts with Dusknoir on big Pokemon. And then we got the one Artisan, it's our stadium. I'm not sure about Artisan being our stadium, but it feels like it's the best stadium for this deck right now. There's not really much else you would want to play for your stadium, but it is a little bit of a double-edged sword, so you kind of got to be a little careful with it. Then we got 3 Psychic, 3 Fire as our energy. That's about all you need. You just, as long as 6 is like enough that when you can draw them pretty consistently, and with your Earthen Vessel, they're like not terribly hard to find. And you really don't need to have that many energy to win the game, so 6 is a pretty good count. Alright, and then our next thing I want to talk about is our matchups. I've kind of been talking about this throughout, but where I feel like this deck is really going to thrive is against Noctowl decks like Raging Bolt. Just being able to pick off Hoothoot and Pheasantipede in one attack with the help of Dusclops is really hard for decks like Raging Bolt to come back from. Just wiping all of their draw power off the board and Ionoing them to like 3, 2, or 1 could just be completely game winning for you. And then walls, like I said, with a Devo, you have a pretty easy time getting rid of Milotic EX, and that's really the only wall you ever have trouble with. Farigiraf doesn't do anything to your deck. Cornerstone Agapon doesn't do anything to your deck. So just evolving Milotics, and then you can pretty easily 2-hit or 1-hit off the with. You essentially 1-hit the other guys if you set up the damage on them, and then you can just devo the Milotics out of play. Makes it pretty easy. And then Guardy should be a pretty good matchup with the Devo as well, along with the Dusknoir line. Setting up damage on Guardies, you can wipe a lot of Gardevoir pieces off the board in one shot. And then, of course, you can always use your counter catcher, get rid of Monkey Dory, stuff like that. And then for what I think this deck is going to struggle with, Terrabox, the combination of Wellspring Mask, Ogerpon, and Lily's Clefairy EX can be pretty devastating to deal with. An early Wellspring Mask knocking out 2 of your Dracloaks is basically game losing, it feels like, in a lot of spots. So you really got to get them early with the Budew and hope they can't really get around it. And then the Lily's Clefairy EX in there just one-shots your Dragapult EX, and also makes it so their Mew can use Copy Phantom Dive to one-shot your Dragapult EX and even like knock a Duskull off your bench. So that can be pretty frustrating to deal with. And then I also think Enzor could potentially be a tough spot for this deck, because copying Enstar Manatan can knock out 2 of your Dracloaks in one attack early. That can be pretty devastating. And then if you can't one-shot Enzor, copying Reshiram can also be pretty tough to deal with, because that can also one-shot you like the Lily's Clefairy. So I feel like those 2 matchups are going to be pretty tough. But you're favored into quite a bit of the rest of the meta. And I think there are some cards you can try to play to try to fix those matchups. Another card I've been considering in this list is Technical Machine Evolution. Instead of the Jocks, Technical Machine Evolution can be a bit more efficient than Jock. You get your Dragapult into play earlier, but it does require you to commit energy to your active Pokemon, and it requires you to skip using Budew. So I haven't tested it yet, but I have a feeling that not being able to use Budew with it is probably going to be too bad for it to come back on, but it's something I'm thinking about. The Unfair Stamp Chris, you could also decide to play Unfair Stamp as your ace-spec, which can be pretty devastating if your opponent just like knocks out your Budew on like turn 2 or 3, and then you Unfair Stamp them to 2 and like stretch for your Budew and do it again. You can put your opponent pretty far behind with that. But if you're doing that, I think you also need to play cards like Crispin and Super Rod in your deck to keep up on energy attachments. So there's a little bit of a trade-off there. You probably need to cut some consistency cards to fit those. Blood Moon Ursaluna EX is also a card I've considered. It can also answer Milotic, so you could probably cut Devo and play this instead. So you can like Dusclops, Milotic, and then use Blood Moon to knock it out. If you play Blood Moon, you definitely want to have Switch in there, maybe even Turo. So those are some cards to consider putting in if you play Blood Moon. You can also possibly flip the Dusclops and Dusknoir counts. But like I said earlier in the intro, I think Dusclops is generally going to be more powerful right now, because you can set up your counter catchers on Hoothoots, and you really don't need to do more than 50 damage to the little Pokemon that you want to knock out off the bench. Second Budew, also something worth thinking about. It's one of our best things to do on our first turn going second, so having more in your deck means it's not prized as often, and when it's not prized, we're pretty happy to just go into it. So second Budew, also something to consider, as well as the fourth Iono. Like I was talking about earlier, fourth Iono. Iono is one of our best supporter cards. We want to play it more in the mid game though, so having them super early isn't always the best. but having more is always good. So 4th Iono, definitely worth trying to find a spot for if you don't like some of the text I've included. Alright, and that's going to do it for this video. Hope you liked it or found it informative. Please leave a like, comment, and subscribe to Krakenhits, and I'll see you guys next time.